I know a lot of you folks. I'm David Litsky. I'm a Houston Mod board member, and I just want to mention a few people. There are a lot of folks here that worked on this for several months, putting this together. So we'd like to thank a few of them, and you can see these names as it scrolls through on the screen there. So first of all, the event presenter and sponsor is Houston Mod, and I know most of our board members are here tonight, and several of our advisory board members are here. And if we could bring the house lights up just a little bit, I'd like our board members and advisory board members to at least wave or throw up an arm. Hello, guys. Thank you. Glad for y'all to be here. Appreciate that. In our co-sponsor organizations, the Historic Resource Committee of AIA Houston, Preservation Houston, Docomomo US, and our individual super sponsor, Cynthia Tolles. So Cynthia played a major role in organizing this event. Our individual major sponsors, Marley Lott, thank you, Marley. Kamala Tipton and John Bebout. I know those guys are here. Thank you. Our individual sponsors, Kathy Hurd Design. Kathy also played a major role in organizing the event. Joan Harmon and David Hume. You guys here? Robert Searcy Properties. Robert, I know you're here. Our in-kind sponsors, Copy.com, and Michael Strickland Design Group. And Michael and Nikki did all this great graphic design work and the promotional materials. And they did a lot much more beyond that. Thank you, Michael. And of course, Paper City, our media sponsor. And I know Catherine Anspon is here somewhere lurking. Thank you, Catherine, and your team. And we have some anonymous sponsors, and y'all knew who you are. Yes, thank you. Oh, yes, Sunset Settings. Gosh, so sorry. They provided the chairs and the tables here on the stage, and we're grateful for that. My apologies. And I'd also like to acknowledge Stephen Fox, who, along with Cynthia and Kathy, really hatched this plan of bringing the authors to Houston. And of course, as he always does, he's provided invaluable research that's gone into this production. So where are you, Stephen? Thank you, Stephen. So one planning note change here for the program is that co-author Jo Lauria was unable to attend as she planned, and she sends her regrets. However, we are fortunate in that a friend of hers and a collaborator of Joe's is here to present her portion of the lecture, and that's Katie Nartonis. Katie. And Katie's a writer, curator, and filmmaker who specializes in 20th century art and design. And after a decade of working in film and television, she switched careers, spent over 20 years in the auction business, curating at Lama, Bonhams, and Heritage in their respective 20th century design departments. And, more exciting, her documentary film on San Diego designer maker Jack Rogers Hopkins will debut at the 2023 Palm Springs Modernism Week in February. Yeah. And she currently runs the Joshua Tree Art Gallery, and is the arts writer for Joshua Tree Voice magazine. And of course, co-author Catherine Cody, who was fortunate enough to grow up in the William F. Cody family, and she became the steward of his papers in 2006, and those have since been transferred to the San Luis Obispo, California College, and she has a background in residential design and interior design. And then Don Choi was a PhD professor of architecture history at California Polytechnic University, where he teaches history and theory. And he has a connection to Houston, and that is Masters of Architecture is from Rice University. And I know some of his fellow classmates are here today from Rice. And then Kathy Hurd is a local-based architect who is best known for award-winning restaurant designs, and she's been practicing here for over 40 years. And she's previously served on the board of AIA Houston chapter, among other similar organizations. And then many of you know David Bucek, who's a principal of Stern Bucek Architects, and he currently serves on the board of Houston Mod, Architecture Center Houston Foundation, and he's the chair of the City of Houston Archaeological and Historical Commission, and he, of course, serves on many other boards and has so in the past, but we have limited time, so can't go through all those. So before we get to our speakers, I would like to ask the audience a few questions. This is our first phase of our audience participation. So could we have a show of hands? How many design professionals do we have here? Architectural historians, architects, interior designers, educators? Yeah? We're all inclusive? Anything sort of related? We have a few? Okay, hands down. So how many people here have been to Palm Springs? What? No kidding. Wow. I'm impressed. Me too. I'm impressed. So those of you who haven't, you get it on your bucket list because I think it must be a truly unique place. I thought I was prepared to go. I went this past February for Modernism Week, and I wasn't prepared. It was so much more than I expected. So I encourage you all to go. So before we get started, please mute your phones, if you would. Later in the evening, before we get to the last speaker, we're going to hand out some cards, note cards and pens. So if you have some questions for the speakers, we'll collect those, and then we'll go through them. We'll ask as many as we can, based on the time we have left. And with that, I'll turn it over to Katie.
Thank you, David. Good evening, everyone. I am just so thrilled to be here this evening and grateful to help tell the origin story of the Bill F. Cody book and exhibit. Joe Loria and Kathy Cody met through a mutual friend, someone you may all know, who is Charles Hollis Jones, the mid-century acrylic designer. And anyone know of his work? Well, do look him up. He's fantastic. And Charles had worked with John Lautner early in his career, and he knew Bill Cody's work and admired it greatly. And when Kathy and John met, he asked Kathy, "How are you going to cement your father's legacy?" And at this point, Kathy knew that she wanted to do a book, but she didn't know how. She didn't know where to start. And it was when Charles Hollis Jones said to Kathy, "You need to meet my friend Joe Loria. She gets things done." That's when the project was born. Aha, okay. This is the title wall for the 2016 exhibit, Fast Forward, the Architecture of William F. Cody, which was at the A+D, or Architectural and Design Museum. And this title wall was designed by an English designer named Andrew Byram, who went on to design the Cody book for Monticelli Press. Andrew had previously designed the Eames exhibit at A+D, and he cleverly incorporated Bill Cody's own kind of drawing elements in this title wall. You can see that there are palm trees and figures and a little umbrella. At this point in the presentation, the authors wish to thank Tibby Dunbar of the A+D Exhibit Committee for realizing the Cody Show in 2016. This is the front elevation of the Architecture and Design Museum in downtown Los Angeles. The banner to the right hung to the right of the exhibit doors when you enter. The project walls of the exhibit featured 15 prominent Cody commissions, including private homes, golf clubs, and commercial buildings, and even included a section detailing Cody's early work with developer Cliff May. This photo shows a small part of the timeline chronology that extended over 41 feet in length. It covered 100 years of history from Cody's birth in 1916 to the 2016 exhibit. The chronology was extended when the book was printed in 2021. This is the beautifully designed cover for the book on Cody, and to the right is a photograph printed on the hardcover. It's the image that includes, on the left, shows the removable belly band with another photograph that surrounded the hardcover of the book. The first printing of the book was in September of 2021, and the second printing was in July of 22. This image shows Kathy Cody. It's an image from Modern Luxury magazine. And when Kathy discovered that a large collection of Cody plans, drawings, and ephemeral material had been stored after Winnie Cody passed, she realized that she could tell her father's story. The collection included such things as early drawings from Cody's years at USC as a student of architecture, and many of his design drawings created throughout his career as a professional architect. The image on the left, as I said, is Kathy Cody with that newly discovered Cody materials. And this gift joined the donation given by Cody's late wife, Winnie, and they became the William F. Cody Papers. Kathy and Joe and the authors note that one of the most interesting advantages of having the authors access to the comprehensive Cody architecture archive was having the privilege of viewing the materials in person. And they spent time observing the details and textures of his drawings. Here are several signatures that Cody used in his life, from his youth when he signed his drawings with his initials to the final iteration of his full name in capital letters. This slide shows Bill's card for the architecture practice in the mid-1950s. On the back are addresses for his main Palm Springs office and his satellite offices in Los Angeles and San Diego. I'd now like to introduce my dear friend Kathy Cody, Bill Cody's daughter, to talk about her father's early architectural and artistic development and his time at USC.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight with all of us. I want to thank Cindy Tolles, Kathy Hurd, David Lidsky, Stephen Fox, Michael Strickland, David Bucek, and everyone who have contributed to make our event possible. I'm very grateful to Adam Adams for the restoration of the Robinson House, which initiated today's event. The left image is my father with his mother, Anna Elizabeth. And on the right is, he's with his father, who is William F. Cody Sr., known as Will. Anna was my father's first mentor. She was an accomplished artist in watercolors and oils, and also designed wallpaper. Her recognized talent preceded her as a woman in a men's dominated profession, and she worked as an interior designer for a commercial firm. Anna married Will. After she married Will, she left her career to start a family, and she continued painting and had a home studio wherever they lived. Anna began to teach Bill to draw as a young child. Bill revealed a talent and enthusiasm for drawing, and Anna regularly took him out to sketch and paint landscapes and styles of architecture. Her encouragement directed Bill's artistic interests to the fine arts and the study of architecture. As he matured, he was timing his drawings. This and the following image are early sketches of residences in the Los Angeles area. Bill's younger brother, by 9 years old, was my Uncle John, who remembered from a young age watching Bill and their mother drawing house plans in her studio. My uncle told me that their mother wanted Bill to become an architect. He told me that she was an intelligent, bold, and courageous woman. Bill's artistic skill was recognized at Hawthorne Middle School, where he developed a reputation as the class artist, and he became the art editor for the school's journal. While at Beverly Hills High School, he was the set designer for the drama department. This image is his illustration for the 1934 senior class production of A Merry Mad Modern Comedy. My mother, Winifred, was in the cast. The following is a photograph of this scene during the play. I don't know which one's my mother. This slide and the next 3 slides are examples of my father's USC coursework, illustrating his versatility with ink, graphite, colored pencil, and watercolor. His adept illustration skill allowed him to create versatile styles of presentation drawings. Notice in the drawings his unique landscaping style and of how he uses color to create changes of the atmosphere and create an illusion of depth. In this drawing of a town hall, the thin roof of the circular colonnade on the left and the flattened arches to the right are design elements that Bill would use later in his professional work. The lighting contrast Bill creates in this drawing for a USC campus building highlights the importance of the building. Bill's design and illustration skill was recognized in 1941 by his architecture professor, V.L. Ennis. Ennis wrote a letter to the armed forces requesting Bill's deferment of enlisting until he graduated the following year because of his unquestioned leadership as a pace setter in his profession. This drawing of a nightclub is one of Bill's watercolor perspectives. The following slide I'll show you is an excerpt from a letter written to me by USC alumnus architect William Kreisel, acknowledging Bill's talent. When I entered USC, Bill was a known and admired legend. His ability at watercolor perspectives was unequaled and shown as something that true architects should master. I did my best to learn from his techniques. Seeing his drawings were the best education I got. Before entering USC in 1940, Bill started apprenticing for architects after graduating from high school in 1934. By 1936, he began developing his own career of designing and delineating projects for developers working out of his family Brentwood home, which he continued to do until his graduation from USC in 1942. This watercolor for the Ahern residence he produced for developer Cliff May. There he is with the wild tie. Before acquiring his architectural licenses for California and Arizona in 1946, Bill opened his first office in West Los Angeles in 1944 while working as the head designer for Marsh, Smith, and Powell Architects. In 1946 was also the year that my parents moved with my oldest sister, Diane, to Palm Springs, where they established their permanent residence and Bill's home office. The LA office remained a satellite office until the mid-1950s. My father was known for his sense of humor. He shows this in this presentation drawing for the 1950 Mercer's Funeral Home in Phoenix, Arizona, with a skull rock and artery-looking landscaping in the foreground. The following slide is a close-up. Bill's whimsical personality is again expressed with his presentation drawing of a central water feature for a business park and pavilion, showing his stylized people, landscaping, and lollipop trees. Okay, that's part of the slide. Peers called Bill an architect's architect. His design reputation allowed him exclusivity as a designer. In the 1950s, he was invited to work as a designer at the Los Angeles firm of Pereira and Luckman, but chose to stay independent. Architects A. Quincy Jones, William Pereira, Edward Killingsworth, and George Haslund were close peers who admired Bill's talent. And now, I would like to invite Don to come up and share with you some of Bill's projects.
Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be back in Houston. I left here 15 years ago, and it is wonderful to be back here in this place in Midtown, which is very different when I was here 30 years ago. William Cody is an architect who is particularly interesting to me, simply because he could design anything. So I'm going to show you a few works, and I could talk for hours, as my students would complain to you about. But I just have a few minutes to show you a few works. I'm going to start off with this Thunderbird Country Club, because Bill Cody becomes known as the kind of go-to designer for modern country clubs. This building I won't talk about much, because he just did a kind of remodel of an existing dude ranch. But one of the things we take for granted today is that there are golf courses where houses sit right on the fairways. And this apparently comes from Bill Cody. So at the Thunderbird Golf Club, he proposed that there would be no barriers between the fairways and the houses. No shrubs, no bushes, no walls, nothing. And so this becomes so popular, it's executed in other golf courses in the area and in fact all around the country. But it appears to have started right here at Thunderbird with Bill Cody and the rest of the team. And so one of the things I also want to remind you of is that a golf course in Palm Springs is a fundamentally kind of radical reimagination of the landscape. This is what it looked like. And something else I want to point out, that I would go into more if we had the time, is that in Palm Springs, as in other places, country clubs are fundamentally exclusionary bodies, right? And so the black laborers, the Agua Caliente Indian laborers, they could build it, but of course they could never join it. And so there's actually a legacy in Palm Springs of modernism as part of the creation of this new world. But it was a new world of post-war affluence and luxury that, of course, didn't allow certain kinds of people in. If you weren't affluent, white, and Christian, your chances were not so great. But that's a set of stories for another time. What I want to show you here is this wonderful house for the Jorgensens. It was actually bought shortly after completion by the Mavis family, and it's been maintained in beautiful condition. So it looks today very much like it looks here. And it's also very similar to the house that David Bucek will talk to you about in a few minutes. Now, so these houses were part of the Thunderbird Country Club estates. So houses built right on the fairways. And they're relatively closed on the front, as you can see with that beautiful stone wall. And they're designed to be more open to the back. So in this drawing here, I know that's too small to read, but Cody has given us views. So here is a view out to, I think, Mount San Jacinto and Mount San Gorgonio, to the Thunderbird Country Clubhouse, to the fairway right here. And so, as I mentioned, the Thunderbird was the first golf club in which the houses were right on the fairways. And so there are views not only to the fairways, but also to the mountains. And if you've been to Palm Springs, it's a very dramatic, very beautiful landscape. And so that's what it looked like back when the house was done in about 1955. So we have the pool here, and this wonderful landscape out here. And this is the fairways here, the country club clubhouse over here somewhere. And take a look at these chairs right here, because here we are this year. And so these are the same chairs. They have new upholstery, but they're the same chairs as from 1955. And so I want to emphasize that to show you how beautifully this house has been maintained over the decades. Many of the houses in this area were actually used as winter residences, so they didn't get the kind of all year wear and tear that a typical house might suffer from. Now, as I mentioned, Bill Cody could design anything. This is a restaurant in Palm Springs, now sadly long gone. And it is a restaurant that is in some ways akin to the kind of googie restaurants of Los Angeles. The googie restaurants were these very kind of gaudy, commercial, colorful things. The most famous firm was Armit and Davis. And Bill Cody was actually a friend of Eldon Davis of Armit and Davis. So he knew about the googie. He knew about Southern California, of course, having grown up there. But Bill Cody would never do something that kind of garish, that almost tacky. So the Springs restaurant is eye-catching, but it's actually very elegant, and it's really beautifully suited to its context. So back in the day, Palm Springs was not built up like it is today. So from anywhere in the city, you could see the desert and you could see the mountain. And so here we have these wonderful horizontal, almost javelin-like beams that are sticking out. We have the sharp angles here of this kind of prow-like element coming down almost to the ground in front of the entrance. And so those strong shapes play off the kind of rugged boulders and other features of the landscape. So that powerful landscape required a kind of strong architecture. And part of that architecture here was that use of the angle all over. The floor plan was based on triangles. We see angles all over here. Bill Cody loved to play with materials. He's known for his stone, for his glass and his steel. But here we see stone and wood. And when he could, Bill Cody liked to incorporate art into his works as well. So we have here the mosaics by Miller Cheats. There are lovely details all over this restaurant. I'll just point out one here. So the seat backs here for the bench are actually custom, and they're actually affixed to the wall right here. So Cody was the kind of guy who designed beautiful details as much as he could. And the last building I'll show you in a minute, the Church of St. Teresa, is one of the great examples of this. But it was the country clubs more than anything else that really made Bill Cody a kind of central figure in the development of modernism in Palm Springs. The El Dorado was so highly regarded that it was called the Taj Mahal of golf clubs. A golf pro was once asked if he had ever seen anything as majestic as the El Dorado Country Club. And he is claimed to have said, well, yes, I guess the chateau at Versailles, but that doesn't have underground cart storage. Now, Cody imagined this really almost like a classical temple with its beautiful white columns and stands up on a little rise. And so this was an architecture that was unequivocally modern. But Bill Cody was not a minimalist in any manner. So when we look at this, there are these wonderful details everywhere, whether it is that bench, whether it's the curves of that mosaic pool or the sculpture here, or the way that from the entrance you can see all the way through the building to the mountains and the golf course behind. So the architectural elements are very simple, but the overall effect is remarkably rich. And this is true inside as well. Sorry, we're waiting for... There we go. I teach at a state school, so I'm used to, tech breakdowns. So inside, look at these wonderful details. So there is the fireplace detail here. He loved to use these masonry blocks in various configurations. And then look at the door to the men's locker room here. So these distinctive bow tie figures right here. And that's too small to see. It simply says men's locker room. But those are actually in Bill Cody's own font. I actually have a student who has a project, created a font based on some of the letters from his drawings. So it's projects like this that really emphasize both Cody's ability to design pretty much anything, and also the ways in which his modern architecture was very, very rich and very beautifully detailed. So look at this little constellation of lamps here, designed by Cody. And so they're all kind of similar, right? They have a kind of a glowing globe in the middle, but they're all also a little bit different. And so there was a kind of consistency, but also a remarkable amount of variety in here. And so Cody's architecture was never kind of plain and repetitive. He was not one of the modern architects who was looking for standardization. Instead, each project was very distinct and unique, and often closely related to that landscape. And when you have this gorgeous landscape outside, of course, these floor-to-ceiling windows make a huge amount of sense. Along with the El Dorado, the Palm Springs Spa is probably one of the couple most iconic projects. And this was important in a number of ways. It has this wonderful, lightweight arcade here. The entrance is right through here. It has this Italian glass mosaic pool. So again, this wonderful sense of detail and kind of luxury in modern architecture. By the way, these photos of the spa here are by the great Los Angeles photographer Julius Schulman. Now, Cody at this time was so busy working on the El Dorado and other projects that he actually had to kind of farm out some of the work. So there are two more really well-known modernist architects, Donald Wexler and Rick Harrison, who had actually met each other in Cody's office, and they formed their own firm. And so they were selected to do the working drawings and to oversee construction. There was another architect who was the coordinator with the client who lived in Chicago. And there were various artists as well. You saw from the slides that Kathy showed you that Bill Cody was a wonderful painter himself, and he liked to incorporate artwork by others whenever he could. So we have the sculpture here in bronze by Zimmerman, and then over here by John Mason, we have terracotta sculptures on the walls. And there's art inside as well. So when possible, Cody liked to create this kind of total environment where the art and the architecture could be coordinated. And here what we're looking at is a plaque. This is a plaque that tells us that this spring, this hot spring, was a site that had been sacred to the Agua Caliente band of Cahuilla Indians for hundreds of years. And what is really fascinating about this building is that it is the first large-scale commercial development on Indian lands. And I don't mean that in Palm Springs, but I mean that anywhere in the United States. Now, according to federal law, up until the late 1950s, only 5-year leases could be granted for Indian lands. And so obviously no developer would come in and work with the Agua Caliente to develop their land because 5 years is completely economically infeasible for a project. And so for this, the Agua Caliente band of Indians and people from Palm Springs actually lobbied Congress. And they managed to get Congress to agree to extend leases for up to 25 years. And this is the first project built using that 25-year lease for Indian lands. So it's really crucial as a step in the kind of use of Indian lands. So even though the Agua Caliente owned the land, they didn't have full control of it. They couldn't lease it out for more than 5 years. And the city of Palm Springs was actually very, very desirous of getting their hands on this land because this is a 1 square mile plot of land right in the heart of Palm Springs. And for various reasons, the city wanted to essentially pry control of it away from the Agua Caliente. So this was that first great project that was developed by the Agua Caliente band and by the Chicago developer Sam Banowit. But even that 25-year lease is really not long enough to attract a lot of investment. Before we get to the next stage, though, I want to show you again that beautiful colonnade and then this Schulman photo here. Many of Cody's projects, like the golf clubs and this, were part of this desire to create Palm Springs as a post-war destination. So they were looking for affluent people. Celebrities, for instance, came here from Los Angeles. Industrialists from Cleveland and Chicago came down here because why wouldn't you want to be here instead of Chicago in February? But at the same time, the leaders of Palm Springs were very clear about what kind of clientele they wanted to have in Palm Springs. And so, as I mentioned before, modernism really becomes a kind of method for creating this new vision of post-war leisure that focuses, on the upper middle class and the wealthy, preferably white and preferably Christian. So let's go on to the next stage here, where we have the hotel. So this is built on the same site as the spa itself. This was actually created because after lobbying by the Agua Caliente and other people in Palm Springs, they managed to convince Congress to grant a 99-year lease period, but only for lands owned by the Agua Caliente band of Cahuilla Indians. So again, this was literally an exceptional site. No other Indian land in the entire country was allowed to have 99-year leases. And so with that 99-year lease, Banowit built this wonderful hotel. And this was actually a building that was, it's a hotel, but the units were like apartments because the idea is that you would come here for 3 weeks or a month. And so you would really turn Palm Springs into a kind of part-time home, especially in the cold weather months. But Cody didn't work only in Palm Springs. He worked all over California. So one of the golf clubs that makes his name is the Mission Valley in San Diego, which still exists under a terrible facade as a hotel today. And then this, which was designed in '58 but only finished 10 years later. And I put these side by side to show you the incredible versatility of Bill Cody. He could work in concrete and steel and glass. He could work in wood. He could work in right angles. He could work with obtuse angles. He could do something like this, which is a beautiful, modern, commercial, I'm old enough to know what high fidelity means. I think my students wouldn't, right? But this would have been a kind of cutting edge commercial thing, this beautiful, beautiful, modern, sleek, glassy thing, unfortunately never executed. More country clubs, Alamo, Palo Hills, which still exists today and is still recognizable. Or in Arizona, where he worked here in this bank. There are some wonderful Cody details, the masonry block wall, the cutouts here, the way the columns taper downwards. So this is showing his love for concrete. Or this lovely steel frame house which hovers over the landscape. It's a little dark to see here, but it kind of hovers on these little skinny steel columns. So a beautiful, lightweight, elegant structure. But it wasn't just other places in the United States. He also had projects in places like Hawaii, but Havana. So Arts and Architecture was a great avant-garde modernist magazine of its age in the 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And so they published this project for a mixed-use building in Havana, and Cody's own office would have been up here. Or this, which is for a golf club and hotel in Havana. Now, needless to say, the Cuban Revolution was not kind to golf. There's actually a very famous photo of Fidel Castro and Che Guevara playing a round of golf at this site. They were apparently mocking Eisenhower. Eisenhower, by the way, had a home and was a member of the El Dorado Golf Club that I just showed you. Right, so that's to give you some idea of the kind of clientele of these clubs that Bill Cody worked on. And the last project I'm going to show you is one of his very most personal. This was a St. Teresa church in Palm Springs. This is a church where the Cody family went. Kathy and her sisters went to school here as well. And so it was a kind of dream project, I think, for Bill Cody. And this early rendering here I show you because look at those wonderful trees. Look at the way he does the sky, which is both incredibly abstract but also very, very powerful. And so his ability to draw and to render. I went to architecture school. I can't do this. Chris Stewart, maybe you can do that if you're out there, but most of us couldn't. So Bill Cody was really incredibly talented at this. Now, the final project was scaled down a bit, but it's actually a remarkable thing. So it's all in curves. It's a wooden structure, but it has this kind of curved, kind of battered concrete wall, so that creates this kind of sanctuary within. Here are a couple photographs by Kathy herself, and it shows you these concrete walls. And you also get a sense of the landscape. Now Palm Springs is much more groomed than it was before when this was built. But this desert landscape made powerful forms like this very, very appropriate. It was a kind of spray-on concrete here. And then inside, it's all wood and curves. And so we have 4 planes of the roof, these curved glulam beams, and they all come together above the high altar, and there's a skylight up here. And it's kind of a modern version of the kind of domes that you would see, for instance, in Rome in the Renaissance and Baroque periods. And it's probably no accident, too, that this comes after Vatican II, when the Catholic Church had affirmed the use of modern, not just traditional, but modern art and architecture to further the goals of the church. And so in this church, too, not only the building itself, but also things like the ritual furniture. So this altar and the tabernacle and the crucifix back there, they're all newly designed works of art. For instance, over here on the left is one of the altars that Cody designed. It's made out of travertine. It was so thin here, only about 3 inches, that no one in America would make it. They actually had to have it fabricated in Lucca, in Italy, and have it shipped over. And then look at this wonderful baptismal font. So it's a travertine bottom, and then it has this bronze top that swings across like that to open it up. So beautiful, traditional function, but modern form. And so this church, I think, is a wonderful example of how modern art and architecture were marshaled to the uses of the Catholic Church. And here you can see, too, this altar by Cody and the bench here, and then the tabernacle and the crucifix here are by the Arizona artist Barnabas Wasson. And so throughout the church, we find furniture. The pews were designed by Cody in their beautiful wood furniture. And then here we have the stained glass at the front of the church by Jos Mays, who was a California artisan. And so I think that this is one of the finest examples of this kind of complete work of art that Cody achieved here at the El Dorado and some of his other finest commissions. This was also, of course, like I said, a really personal project for him. It was also one of the final projects that he completed, the large projects he completed before his unfortunate stroke. Now, the other truly personal project, of course, was his own house, which was begun when they went to Palm Springs in 1946 and finished in 1952, illustrated in Arts and Architecture magazine, which showed the work of people like Charles Noray Eames and Neutra. And I wanted to show you that just as a reminder that although Cody is less well known today, he was right there with many of the names that you know, like Eames and Neutra and so many others. So that said, Kathy, I'd like to turn this over to you again. And Kathy and Kathy will talk about their house.
This image, the one on the left, is of my parents on their wedding day on July 31st, 1943, 3 years before they moved to Palm Springs. The Del Marcos Hotel on the right, let's see, this, yeah, that. Was completed in 1947. It was the first commercial project my father did with his license. It received a design award from the AIA and international recognition in a Japanese book on world architecture and was included in the 1950 Britannica Book of the Year.
So what I noticed about this project was that one of the things that's so unique about his work is the way that he did the perimeter fencing of their residence. And Kathy was explaining to me that this wall was actually being built at exactly the same time the walls, which were the very first thing that they built at the property that then became their home. And anyway, I just think it's interesting. You can see him starting to develop this ziggurat kind of thing that he did with these perimeter walls, which is really unique.
Kathy, the great thing is, I just saw it, it's still there. You can still check in and stay there.
Yes.
It's a wonderful place.
Wow.
Yeah,
That
I'm
can't be
grateful
said of all
that
of
it-
these things.
Thank you.
It's tricky, isn't it?
Okay, the left image is the approach to the house from the street. This is actually a gate, this door with the kick plate. When you go through this gate, you're still outside and you follow a passageway to the front door. Above this passageway is a aqua-colored glass that would be in here that continues all the way through like a spine to the front door. It is supported by black steel channels. These steps, they were also painted black, were used throughout the house to define living spaces and outdoor areas with elevation changes. The right image is of the carport. The exterior black structural framing around and outside of the house is supported by pairs of thin black steel posts. The corrugated aluminum awning covers the carport, and similar awnings are used at 3 other locations around the house.
One of the things that Kathy noticed immediately when I showed her some photographs of the local house is that Cody was columns were very important in his work because he did so much essentially exposed structural. And so but this pair of the smaller posts together seems to be kind of unique to their house. I haven't seen that too much elsewhere. But columns are very much a dominant design feature in his work.
These are earlier images taken in -- My parents are surveying their property, and on the right, my father's with my sister Diane. The adobe bricks were made on the site and were used to build the first structure on the property, an angled wall that created pockets of gardens around the house. It took 6 years to finish our home due to steel shortages caused from World War II.
And what I thought was so interesting about the image on the left is that you really see the context that they I wondered why they selected a site after being at the house last February. It's just a house in a neighborhood with, all these other houses all in a row. Well, it wasn't that way initially. They were really out in the middle of nowhere. And they bought some adjacent property, which they eventually sold. But the interesting thing is that they started out in the middle of nowhere, and you can certainly see it there in the image on the left. And they had a view, Kathy will explain in one of the later photographs, of the mountains from inside the house, even after all the development.
This is a model of our home. The main house is divided into two areas. The front is an open plan, and it includes the entrance, dining, kitchen, and living rooms. The private areas in the back of the house are around a central atrium. Every room, including dressing rooms, have views of the atrium or exterior gardens. 2 bathroom showers are actually outside in private gardens. A third shower inside the house had a sliding door to its own private garden. There are 3 reflecting pools around the house.
So one of the things that's so obvious here is this perimeter wall, which is very unusual. The house, Kathy may not approve of this phrase, but it really was her father's folly. It's very, very complicated. And I found that I could not really understand it, and then Don and I worked together to introduce this floor plan in just the last couple of days, which all of a sudden helps make a lot more sense of a lot of things. There's a spine that goes from the front entrance all the way through the house and ends up with the end of the vista is the atrium. And then there, Kathy was explaining to me that these steps that define the areas of the house are major design elements that wrap around and really do separate and define the different areas. But it's made up of, as Kathy was saying, the public areas or whatever that the kitchen and the dining and the living room, and then the master suite in the back that also incorporates one of the children's rooms, which I would quite frankly in this day and age probably call it the nursery, and then the separate guest houses, 7, and then number 1 down there near the front, which eventually over the years were occupied by the daughters as they grew older. I guess one of the other points about this, and looking back at the model, is that we talked about how they entertained there, and I was like, I was there last February. What happened to the swimming pool? Did I miss it? Well, they never built the swimming pool because they bought a beach house. So that whole area that was supposed to be pool, became lawn and was an overflow area for parties and
This area here. Yeah. Oops.
and they were big entertainers. And I want to make certain I say the phrase about her father that has always hit me, and that he was a true bon vivant.
Yeah. In this 1952 image is my sister Diane. Now she's 8 years old, and a new member of the family is Lynn, of 4 years old, and they're standing in the framing of the house. This is Bill's drawing of the front guest room. The entrance is on the left, off of a courtyard. The 2 steps on the left continue beyond the room, and this window is actually cut. There's no metal holding the glass in there. It just disappears into the surrounding surfaces, and the base of the window is cut as the shape of the step. Outside is a planter, and in the patio outside to the right is another reflecting pool. In the middle of this pool, this dish was not ever actualized, but instead there was a gas valve in the center And when it was lit, the flame flickered reflections on the water, the glass, and the underside of the awning above. This is my father's drawing of the driveway and the carport. The blackened window here is has the dining area on the other side, and on this side was another reflecting pool with a pool light in the bottom, and perpendicular to the dining room window was a translucent screen that shielded the front door from the street for privacy. The adobe brick wall here is the outside of the kitchen.
I want to make certain we didn't skip over. One of my questions for Kathy was, what was it like to play in that yard with those walls the way they were? And she shared with me that it was really the children's folly, that it was a great place to play and play hide and seek. And I was kind of wondering, could you really play in this yard? You know, could you play kickball or whatever? And anyway, it had a life of its own. But the other thing I find interesting is the way he introduced water, the two pools that were lit by pool lights, and then the third was the one that was lit by the gas flame. But also there is a ceiling that runs the full length of this entrance area that is aqua or turquoise glass, and as the sun came through it, there was this beautiful color that came through. So there was this wonderful water color element added to this house out here in the desert.
Kathy's talking about, there's the aqua colored glass that extended down to the front door there. This image on the left shows the master bedroom and the awning, the aluminum awning between the master bedroom and the back guest house. The living room and the entrance foyer of the house is beyond the cacti planter. The right side picture is taken after our family moved in. Our collie, whose name was Bo, was a housewarming gift by my father's clients for the La Horizon Hotel, Jack Rather and Benita Granville. They produced the Lassie and the Lone Ranger TV series. So Bo could have been related to Lassie.
He probably was.
This planter.
She's very modest about all these celebrities in their lives.
This planter is the front of this here, before the cacti was planted. And right up here, you can see this shaded area. This panel slid open at night so they could stargaze while they were lying in bed.
And they really used it. I thought it was just kind of a joke, but she said no, and it was electronic.
Behind Bo, behind Bo. Oh, you can see how transparent the house is because you're on the west side of the living room, and you can see through the atrium to the east garden it's on the other side of the window in the children's bedroom. So just like the picture Don showed of El Dorado, how you could see right through the building, you can see how it was here too. Here's my dad with his 3 daughters. This is Lynn on the left, Diane on the right, I'm in the center, and Bo. And this is the glass, the aqua glass on the outside. This is taken from the northeast corner of the living room out towards the Mount San Jacinto. The conversational pic gave you a worm's eye view of the mountain and the sky. and the yard outside, these sliders opened up so that the party's people, the continuation of the party filled out into the patio outside. These full-height accordion doors folded back onto this stationary panel. And on the right here is a slider that opened up to the atrium.
So what I asked Kathy to really think about discussing here is that they had absolutely zero hesitation about including all these exotic things that they bought from around the world. And of course, we've also known about the controversial situation with Mrs. de Menil and Philip Johnson when she hired, and I can't remember the designer's name, to do Charles James, to design the interior and use all kinds of Fortuny and different kinds of fabrics. And I think Philip Johnson was quite nauseated by all that. So it's really special to know that an architect can include all of these decorative elements, and it goes to the what do we call the freeway, what's it called,
On the freeway?
the googie.
Oh, the googie.
But the other thing I think is interesting here is that I believe we can see Wegener chairs
Yes.
around the table, and in some of the photographs that recently surfaced for me, the first time to see them, of the local house, there are Wegener chairs, and it was the first chair I fell in love with when I started learning about contemporary furniture. And I believe you said your parents bought those in Scandinavia?
Yes, they took, their first trip to Europe was 1960, and they bought a lot of antiques in Spain. And in 1962, they went back, and they, part of the countries, some of the countries they visited was Denmark, and they bought 8 Hans Wagner chairs and a gate leg table. It wasn't Hans Wagner, but a different designer. And then this is 1955, early. He knew Charles and Ray. And
It's the real thing.
This is I believe this is rosewood, but
It is.
Then, okay, these tables he designed for the conversation pit, and there's one here that has longer legs into the pit, and then shorter legs on this for this level. He had his tables the laminate top tables with the teak wood base. He worked with Arthur Elrod, who also designed our sofas for the living room. I don't know
Party
what,
animals.
I don't know what they said to my mother for that, but but anyway, this is the only solid wall in the atrium. And it has a wonderful abstract mosaic made of different colored rocks. Here it is, you can see it briefly back there. This is a Spanish Vargueño. It's a 2-piece from Spain on their first trip they bought. And also this galleon ship was from that trip. This is a Spanish brazier they also bought in 1960. Here's the tables from Arthur Elrod's, and this is part of I guess you call it a Davenport sofa on the right. This is our baby grand piano that was my grandmother's. My mother was a blues singer. So when they had parties and someone played the piano in her key, she would entertain. And now, Katie and I are going to talk about 2 homes my father designed that the owners kept everything, the interiors and exterior, in original condition. I go first, but you can come with me. Okay. But first I'm going to talk about the Kerfoot residence in Newport Beach. This is the front approach to the Kerfoot residence, and it shows the horizontalness of the 3-car garage, the translucent screen of the sculpture garden and the entry pergola in front of the verticality of the home's two-story section. The pair of walnut doors are 8 feet high and match the walnut panels above that extend to the underside of the roof overhang. These doors open into the two-story foyer and the living room. Inside, looking towards the front doors, cedar siding extends down the wall and continues for the ceiling of the living room, or the dining room, I'm sorry. The dining room has a view of the sculpture garden. Mrs. Kerfoot is an artist. Her name is actually Carol Sandin. She was an artist before she married. And she was also, her husband and she were art collectors. Her studio is above the study up there. And it was planned with generous natural lighting on 3 sides. The fireplace on the left is featured like a framed piece of art. Ahead of the entry foyer, the ceiling is lowered to the height of the dining room. On the right, the cedar paneling of the accordion doors aligns with the paneling above when they are closed. The tile floor leads the visitor around to the family room behind the dining room to the right. This is the back of the house. The roof over the art studio extends over the balcony, providing shade to the study below. On the left is the family room and breakfast area. Walnut is used for the cabinetry in the family room, the kitchen, and for the bathroom cabinetry. The bedrooms are in the 1-story wing to the left. And also behind, behind these pair of doors, this is a bar that you can access from the other side where the dining table is. And now Katie's going to talk about the Rubenstein house. Thank you, thank you. You need your notes. I'll take them out of your way, okay?
Thank you, Kathy. The Rubensteins they're from Seattle, and they bought a fairway lot at the Tamarisk Country Club in Rancho Mirage as a winter getaway in the early 1970s. A neighbor recommended that they meet with Bill Cody, and Gladys, the wife, Samuel and Gladys Rubenstein, met with Bill at his office. And with her, she brought magazines that featured Mexican homes and gardens for Cody to consider as their preferred design style. The home would need to showcase their large contemporary art collection and to entertain large groups of friends. After that initial meeting, the Rubensteins returned to Seattle, and after the summer, the following winter, they reviewed Cody's plan for the house. Unfortunately, it did not match Gladys' vision. Cody literally returned to the drawing board and produced an alternative plan that Gladys described as, quote, more magnificent than she could ever have imagined. The house was completed in 1972. Oh, I apologize. This is the Rubenstein house on the screen now. The Rubenstein house is distinctive in that it synthesized Cody's desert modern style with the client's preferred hacienda-style home. Bill's housewarming gift to the couple is a beautiful wall light sconce at the front entrance of the home. We see a photo detail on the right side of the slide. So there's only one of those light fixtures in the image. Here we see the top of the plan for the Rubenstein house. And at the top of the plan is where the house met the golf course on the south side, where it borders the fairway. Like Don was describing, this was a new way of kind of designing houses that went straight out into the golf course. The pond that's noted here in the middle of the courtyard was never built, partly because they realized that because they were having such large parties, they wanted to be thinking about the flow. And I wonder if maybe they were worried that maybe somebody might end up in the pond during a good party. And here we have the Rancho Mirage Register of Historic Places, 1972, William Cody, architect. Here we see the courtyard entrance, which features the custom paneled ceiling and the glass panels which enclose the patio and were operated electronically to open and close. If you have a good eye, you probably have already seen the beautiful gate designed by LA sculptor Claire Falkenstein. This custom gate was made out of metal and glass. It's reminiscent of the gate that Falkenstein designed for Peggy Guggenheim Villa in Venice, if you've ever been there. The red quarry or saltillo tiles continue through the social areas of the home. Here's the living room. Obviously, it's a residence built for entertaining and the display of their art collection. The Rubensteins hired renowned San Francisco interior designer Barry Brukoff to help envision the spaces. The custom display niches are recessed with hidden lighting, and you will note that the glass Dale Chihuly piece, the blue piece in the coffee table, Gladdy was the first patron of Dale Chihuly and built his first studio for him. Here we see the dining room. And the custom designed furniture Barry Brukoff made with consultation with Bill Cody, like the walnut antique veneered dining table and the floating buffet. The 8 plates are Pablo Picasso, and the painting is Italo Scanga. You can see the Falkenstein piece in the background. This is an exterior view of the home. You can see Northern California ceramicist Viola Frey's sculpture of a seated female who's lounging by the pool. The sloped tile roofs of this building overhangs were designed to keep the sun and the heat out of the house and to keep it shaded and cool. In 2012, the city of Palm Springs, during Palm Springs Modernism Week, dedicated a sidewalk star in the honor of Cody. It's located 1 block from his 1947 Del Marcos Hotel, which you saw earlier. And this is a rendering of Bill's proposal, which went unbuilt. Actually, it got built, but he was not the designated architect for the project. I think this is a much better design than the one that ended up there. And you can see this is one of his beautiful watercolor renderings at the top of the mountain there. As a group, we'd love to thank all of the sponsors who have supported us and made this Houston event possible. We're grateful to Jessica Holada and Laura Sorvetti from the Special Collections and Archives from the Robert E. Kennedy Library in Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And we're also grateful to editor Alan Rapp and the design of the book by Andrew Byram, and for all the photographers who took beautiful photographs for the book. I'm now going to turn it over to Mr. Bucek. Thank you.
Before I begin, I just want to thank again Stephen Fox, Kathy Hurd, and Marty Merritt, who helped do a lot of the research for some of the Texas projects outside the Houston area. So the recently published book about William Cody we are discussing tonight mentions two of his residential commissions at the Thunderbird Country Club we learned about from Don had Texas connections. The 1955-56 Moncrief residence and the 1957 Gillen residence for wealthy Texas oilman William Alfred Moncrief Jr., known as Tex McGrief, and John Gillen. Gillen also hired Frank Lloyd Wright to design a home for him in Dallas that was completed in 1958. The William F. Cody Archives at the Cal Poly San Luis Obispo provided additional information about Mr. Cody's commissions in Texas. Some of these projects may not have been realized, are no longer extant, or have been heavily modified. However, his most significant commission, located in Fort Bend County near the banks of Oyster Creek, survives and will be a focus of my presentation. The first project I'll just showcase that was in the files was Mr. and Mrs. Lloyd R. French Jr. residence in Odessa, Texas. And at this time, there's yet any evidence this house was ever built. But it is an example of these shifting planes that we've seen in some of the other projects. And part of those planes help to create these outdoor rooms and spaces that Cody liked to design. Another project we found drawings for and plans of the Kenneth B. Kirk building in Dallas, Texas. Again, there is no evidence to suggest the building was built. So we have tried, using what was in the drawings and what references we have. The next project, which was built, was the Ridley Country Club in Fort Worth, Texas. This is a plan. This is sort of located on the southwest side of Fort Worth. However, this building has been obliterated with a new addition, which is totally unrecognizable. And it's really clear to me whether anything inside of that is reminiscent of anything Cody had touched. But we have found more modified structures in El Paso. We recently were in El Paso for the Texas Society of Architects Convention and paid a visit to some of, sorry, let me back up. Another unbuilt project is the Craftex Enterprise building, which was located on Commerce Street somewhere in Texas, which we also think was never built. This was a company that was in the whole paper business. They sold boxes and kind of corrugated materials. But they have plans by Cody, but they were never realized in doing the searches. So back to El Paso, as I was saying, Cody was involved in design of 2 cottages, although we think 3 were built, 2 of the plan type A. And these were cottages that were designed to be the country club while the actual clubhouse was under construction. So they're located right across the street from the 10th hole. There's an elevation of the unit at type A. This was a plan. We noticed a very interesting sidewalk. There are actually, the newspaper articles talk about 2 being built. Locals talk about that 3 were actually built. And this one, in fact, had the Golf Pro Shop inside of it. This is Unit B. This was entered actually from the rear or the side facing the country club. There's been extensive modifications to these properties. They didn't actually, 2 of them didn't face the street originally, and so they were modified to be separate homes after the country club was built. And these are kind of what these homes look like today. And it's really looking at Google Earth and plan and studying the plan and where the fireplace is, where the entrance sequences are, that we can see. And I've spoken to the owner of Torrey Pines, where the pro shop was, a woman who lives in the home that was previously her mother's home, and confirmed to me that her mother had built a series of additions all around the house, which is why it is really unrecognizable today. Another project we found in the files was an alteration for perhaps an existing building for a security company. The only thing I can say is the front entry piece, the wall and sort of the construction, has Cody's touch. Again, we're not sure where in Texas this was meant to be, and so we have no idea whether it was actually constructed. Another project here in Houston, Texas, was for Dr. Hampton C. Robinson Jr., who was with Herman, and this was in the doing a search of his address, and then following on the plan. This was actually in the Herman building on the 6th floor, which has been totally redone. It's now UT Physicians, and so there's nothing left of this plan. But what was interesting was when you're walking down the hallway to get into the lobby, and once you enter the lobby, you can see like flagstone flooring inside of this, and sort of there's a little right here, little kind of a desertorama kind of gathering. So it's very modest, but again, it shows his touch. And the reason that perhaps this project even exists is because Cody was, of course, designing a home for Dr. Robinson and his wife, which is really the focus of what I will talk about. And that is not their primary home. They live in River Oaks. This was a weekend retreat home located outside the city in Fort Bend County on Oyster Creek. And it was designed for Dr. Robinson and his wife, Patricia Elizabeth Welder Robinson. And within the family, this was called the farmhouse. And I'm going to talk about why that's why it was a farmhouse. Located in Fort Bend County, this is the actual map given to their guests to visit the farmhouse. And you can see if you were coming from River Oaks, let me back up. If you were coming from River Oaks down Willowick, you would come down San Stella Link, hitting Highway 90, and then going down DeWalt Road. Here's DeWalt, Texas, and this is the Robinson Farm. You can see how big downtown Houston is, and you can see it's about 2,000 acres of land. This is an aerial photograph taken in 1971. This is DeWalt, Texas. This is DeWalt Road. This is Highway 6 and the Sugar Land, sort of the sugarcane railroad that took the sugarcane from these former plantations. And this, in fact, was a large plantation originally, the DeWalt plantation. And Mr. Robinson was a member of the DeWalt family. His mother was actually a DeWalt. And he spent a good bit of time reconstructing some of the land which had been lost over the years. The arrow is pointing to the house here. So here's the house. And I'm going to use some Sanborn map. So here's a 1955 U.S. Geological Survey of the area. And what I will point out is we have DeWalt Road, which is now Murphy Road. This is Highway 6. This is Oyster Creek. This is the location of where the house would be built on an old oxbow lake, former bed of the creek itself. And the property was accessed by an oyster shell gravel drive at the railway stop at DeWalt. Now the next image, this is taken, this map is later in the 60s. You can see the house in this image right here. And you can see other structures which are really to scale of how big a house would be in this area. And so this was a rather large house, I would say. And what happened is that bridge went away and a new driveway was created to DeWalt Road. And another drive was created up to Cartwright Road. And these roads all exist today as part of a development, which I will explain. I grew up watching TV in in the 70s and 80s. I always remember the show Dallas, and this slide really, made me think about it. This was here's the house on the property, and this was the drive they created to DeWalt Road, which is now Murphy Road and Highway 6. They planted a number of oak trees along this drive. This is an actual photograph from Dr. Robinson's Lincoln Continental. You can see these trees planted here. This is today Hampton Drive, and these oak trees still exist in Missouri City, where the house is now located. One of the things I found interesting, and perhaps the only ranch entrance designed by William Cody in America, perhaps, it was never built that we know of, but this was the entrance at DeWalt Road and what is now Hampton Drive. You'll notice that Cody designed this mid-century modern entrance for this ranch, but included traditional methods of like split rail fencing along with these stone inset walls. And so, here's in Texas, we have a mid-century modern ranch entrance. And again, I'm not aware of that occurring anywhere else, but it's something we found in the file from the archive. Now here's an aerial photograph of the house taken again in 1971. There are a number, what I want you to notice about this house, which we'll talk about, there are a number of openings in the roof, and these are all sun courts. And every bedroom in this house, the primary parts of the house, except for the servant's bedroom, which is actually one of the children was their bedroom, had bathrooms and showers with full glass walls that looked into private courtyards. Each of those courtyards had a small private louvered door that they could go out through that courtyard and go out to the pool. And so it was, there were Joshua trees planted in these courtyards. There was an interesting sort of matrix of pergola that would cover these things with the fascia material, which is Pecky cypress. We'll talk about this plan in this as I move forward, but you'll notice it has these wings that come out, and it's part of what has been described in the book, again, as these pinwheel plan asymmetrical arrangements, which create these outdoor rooms and spaces and framed views. And here's a picture of the house from the front, and here's Dr. Robinson Jr. Standing on the land. And again, this house is located on this prairie, a very flat land. But one of the things I really learned about the house was, was really, it's a house and a site that was really the result of the efforts of both Mr. and Mrs. Robinson. And so I want to mention a little bit about the families, both of their families particularly, because part of the story about why this house occurred and where it occurred has to do with each of them. On the left are Robinsons, and on the right are Welders. And so this is Dr. Robinson's father. He was Hampton C. Robinson Sr. This is one of Dr. Robinson's children. This is Hampton Robinson III, also known as Hamp. And on the right was Dr. Robinson's brother, Joe Robinson. And his grandfather had married a member of the DeWalt family whose land used to occupy all this area. And again, farming and ranching was a connection for this family. And while Dr. Robinson was a very successful surgeon, lived in River Oaks, he was still very connected to this land. And while most of it had been sold off, he was trying to reconstruct parts of it, and this is where the house was built. Now on the right is Mrs. Robinson. Patricia Elizabeth Welder Robinson. On her left is her brother Patrick Hughes Welder, and on the right, her mother, Minnie Scarborough Welder. From a very prominent family. She grew up in Victoria, Texas, and this was where the ranch was located. And a lot of the revenue from the oil and gas leases funded a lot of the acquisition of the property and actually building of this house. And it's really a story of both individuals that created what we now know as the Robinson House. And the other aspect was their children. And they had, in this picture, starting from the far left, is Patrick Welder Robinson. Next to him was their Hungarian maid, Waggy. To her right is Patricia. And then Mary Danny Josie DeWalt Robinson, who went by Danny Joe. And again, this was the connection to the DeWalt family. Next to her is Justin Hughes Robinson, and again, on the far right, Hampton Carroll Robinson III. So the Cody connection came about during their frequent trips to Palm Springs. And this article talks about their flying out to Palm Springs with another couple. In fact, the family flew to Palm Springs and other places on the family plane. So we're seeing the sons and daughter and the grandparents on the right. And I think it's also, this was, Stephen Fox sent me this article. Mrs. Robinson was voted in a New York magazine as one of the best dressed women in the United States. And so, and so when they were in Palm Springs, in Rancho Mirage, the couple visited the Thunderbird Country Club, which was mentioned earlier. And that inspired Dr. Robinson to envision creating a golf course community on their land in Fort Bend County. At the Thunderbird Country Club, Mrs. Robinson much admired the Jorgensen residence, also described previously in this talk, designed by Cody. And in fact, it was Mrs. Robinson who reached out to William Cody to ask him to design a weekend house for their family with similar features to the Jorgensen house. So when you look at all these images, in many ways, if you're familiar with the Robinson house, it looks very similar to the Robinson house, although we don't have these mountains in the background. But the arbor that was envisioned for this home apparently was never built. But every other aspect of it is it seems like a carbon copy of a vignette, and yet it's not quite the same, and I'll explain. This is the same plan that we saw earlier of the Jorgensen house. And again, this is the pool. This was the arbor that was envisioned but never built. And the living room is here. The master suite is here. The car shelter is here. Now this is the actual Robinson house. And it has very similar features, but it's much bigger. Now, one thing that wasn't built was this entertainment wing was never built. But again, you can sort of see the pinwheel that was described before. But this house is much larger than the Jorgensen house. And of course, when I look at this house, I worked in a very small house here in Westmoreland called the Airplane House. And I always tell Adam, I think this is like a flying fortress when I think of this house in terms of its just the length and how long it is. And just to be clear about the house, again, I mentioned these sun courts, which are shown in blue, which allowed each of those bathroom sequences to go through these glass walls, to have light and a view of nature, but also access to the pool. But the other thing is that this is an overlay. So in yellow is the Jorgensen house. So while elements of that house are in the Robinson house, the pool, everything is on a Texas, supersized scale. And it is, it's a couple hundred feet in any direction. And I've never seen a crack in this house. And so, it was well built by a really prominent construction firm here, which I'll talk about. But it's an amazing feat, in my opinion, just looking at our area. It's also very flat. And I wanted to read some notes that Stephen Fox shared with our committee as we were going through this process. And these are some notes I just took from what Stephen had mentioned. And I just want to think about this house, which is a very low house on the horizon. Mr. Fox said, it's amazing how Cody could make the Robinson house's comparatively low ceilings spaces seem expansive, and the subtlety with which he adjusted the low artificial fill platform on which the house is set to make you aware of the minimal grade changes in the flat landscape. His ability to deploy the pergola structure to extend views from the living room to the pool deck to the south demonstrates his capacity for making the occupants of his house aware of essential characteristics of the landscape in which the houses are set. The most impressive feat, because the essence or challenge of the Robinson House landscape is that it's a flat, boundless, and featureless landscape. Now, again, I mentioned that this house was really about Mrs. Robinson, and this is an article from the newspaper about the house. Again, you can see a drawing on the top by Cody, and we saw a very similar image from Don looking at the Jorgensen house, but you can see that the pergola was constructed on this home, and here's Mrs. Robinson, and I find it, was fascinating, the quote back in 1960 down here, white on white, the white terrazzo floors, white shag carpet in the home. There were some black lacquer elements, but there was a lot of white going on. Here's a picture of one of those showers. You go step in the shower and then step through the shower into the sun court. You see the desert planting, and then from there you could actually walk over to go outside to the pool area. So it was, again, and she, growing up, she grew up in a very architecturally significant home in Victoria, but again, she grew up on a ranch. She wanted a home where she could have horses and be on the land. Here's some images of the house. There are no images of the house after it was constructed that I've been able to find, but these were taken around 1971. And as Don mentioned, there you can sort of see this sort of idea of this temple abstraction of using these columns to sort of set the location of place. In this image, this is Dr. Robinson right here, and his grandson, Adam. And again, the family referred to this as the farmhouse. And at this time, when you're at the pool looking out over the land, these are the views that you would see on the left. On the right is Hampton Robinson III, a little bit older, along with Leon Salazar, who was the longtime ranch foreman. He was the foreman for this farm and the 1,500 head of cattle here from, I think, the 1965 until 2018. But when you're at the house and you look out, you see the herd of cattle. You see the land this is a Texas farmhouse. It just happens to be a very cool mid-century modern home. And why not? Now, sadly, in the mid-'60s, Mrs. Robinson passed away, and eventually Dr. Robinson would remarry. And so in this photograph, which is at the entrance of the home, is a photograph of Louise F. Robinson and her grandson, Adam Adams, who's right here, who spent a lot of time growing up here at the house when he was young. And in the late 60s, Dr. Robinson found investors and made friends with folks who could envision that golf course community that he first experienced at the Thunderbird Country Club in Rancho Mirage. And I understand from Adam that, in fact, Quail Valley, which initially was actually Quail Farm before this, this came from Dr. Robinson. And on the left, you see a plan of this development. This is the large area where the house is located today. This is an aerial photograph. The house is here. All of this land was part of the Robinson farm. This is phase 1 of Quail Valley, which is now in Missouri City. This was phase 2. Now you see the home is encapsulated in this development. So it is much different than it was when it started. I did want to mention that there were other members of the design team, local and one from out of town, that also played a role that was very important. The local firm of Hightower and Moreland Architects, Charles Hightower was the associate architect and had a lot of the responsibilities for talking to the contractors on a day-to-day basis. They made minor sketches and really implemented much of what Dr. Robinson wanted to do. Mrs. Robinson worked with Robert M. Blanks of Seattle, Washington. She also worked with Pat Fleming. I understand from Adam there is some correspondence with Dr. Robinson. I don't think they got along as well, and so there's some later correspondence that Mr. Blanks is actually designing landscaping and implementing some of those features. But I mentioned the construction because this house, you know where we live and our soil moves, and this house is a couple hundred feet. It's very thin, but it's built by Fred's Construction. And as I understand it, Bob Fred Sr., this was his first project as project superintendent. I had the privilege of working with him throughout my life. And again, there's not a crack in this house. The stonework is immaculate. One of the things that we have been able to study are the specifications from Cody, which gave us a lot of information. This had to do with finishes, and also in terms of materials that they were using in the house. Now, it's interesting that the limestone of this house is from Santa Maria, California. And we did paint analysis. A friend of mine, Yanni Langer with Source Historical Services out of Galveston, did analysis on the features. Their house is currently being repainted. And what we'll see here is here's the limestone. This is a shell from inside that west wing from a closet. It's only been painted one time. And on the left is what the paint looks like today. It's oxidized. And so Yanni took some material and stripped that oxidation off to reveal the actual original color of that. And this is the base color for the house. It's called Indian white. And it's kind of an off-white. And it's the major color of the house. And you can see how well it goes with the natural stone. And as an architect, I think it's also, when we think about white, before World War II, this is white. Because it takes titanium to make bright white paint. And titanium wasn't industrially available until World War II made it available. And so even after World War II, Cody's still using colors that are similar to the earth. And it seems to me, in listening and researching him, all those years, the watercolors and the drawings and the paintings, he was still using these same colors that he was familiar with as a child in his built work. Okay, I don't know why that did that. And so this is a kind of a diagram of the house and some of the things we found in the initial analysis. But these are the sort of the range of colors that we found in the house. The Indian white was the predominant color. It's now called warm beige. It's from Sherwin-Williams. But you'll see other tan colors, row house tan, canoe. The master bedroom was this dark brown color. A lot of the concrete was stained. It subsequently was painted black, and we have at least plans to remove many of those items. And I'm going to end on just two images taken, I think back in 2006 by Paul Hester. This house, you can still, for me in this house, the framing of the house today, this is the pergola structure which was suffered greatly during Hurricane Ike in 2008, and so it's no longer standing. But again, it's when Paul took this image, it reminds me of the Cody images I found in the book, and sort of the way that these views are framed, and the way that he's organizing space and shadows in the landscape. And so, thank you.
Folks, before you go, There's still a book signing reception. If you haven't gotten a book, please come, and the authors will sign them for you. Or if you pre-bought, please give them a chance to sign them for you. Yes, and there are gift posters. There were posters up in the lobby. If you saw those, we've got those for you to take. If there are anybody that wanted AA continuing ed credits, we have those approved, and there's a sign-up sheet out in the lobby, so don't forget to sign those. Collect your trash and take them to some receptacles. And let's give our speakers another round of applause. Thank you.